Hello, 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 everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for sticking around. You've already got your food, but I'm really, really thrilled that everyone is still here. Hopefully this is going to be a fun talk, a nice way to round out the evening. I'm going to be talking to you today about what I'm calling the art and science of design research. And this really is about what we can learn as design researchers and other professionals in the design and research fields from behavioral science techniques, methods, but also controversies. I'm going to give you a little bit of gossip in this talk, a little bit of sort of social psychology, secrets behind the scenes. See, I am a social psychologist by training. I've got a PhD in social psychology from Stanford University. What that means is if you're familiar with the Stanford Prison Experiment, those are actually the rooms where I did research. So I had participants come in. I did not lock anybody up and pretend that they were in prison, but I'm intimately familiar with those basement rooms. Worked as a social psychologist, got my degree, did a postdoc, did some academic research, realized I was really just temperamentally not suited for it. I am far too impatient to spend years and years and years on a single research project. I love design research. 4 weeks and it's done and I can move on to the next thing. But I do like bringing some of the rigor of the behavioral sciences into design research, which is why I get particularly cranky when behavioral sciences are not as rigorous as we assume they are, and I will be touching on that later on, so it's something to look forward to. You're all, I'm assuming, friends of behavioral science. You're here tonight. You've signed up to listen to 2 hours of people talking about how behavioral science and UX fit together. I know there's a range of levels of knowledge in this room, but I'm going to assume that you all at least know more about behavioral science than your stakeholders and clients. I will be speaking from that perspective. So this will be very much from the point of view of a design researcher who knows quite a bit about behavioral science and knows how tough it can be to embed either of these approaches in organizations. I've been at Lloyds Banking Group for the last 4 years. As Miles said, I am Community of Practice Lead for Design Research and Analytics, which is a mouthful. Like half my talk is just going to be saying my title over and over. But one of the things that I would like to do is embed a strong insights function that considers behavioral science along with research and analytics. So maybe I'll come back next year and talk about how the first 12 months of that went. We will see. I'm going to get into the meat of the talk. Not meat, actually. Protein, but not animal products. Peanut butter and jam. I'm American, in case it wasn't obvious. I'm based in Edinburgh now, but I grew up in New York City. And some people look at this and think, what a perfect combination. It goes together like peanut butter and jam. I am one of those people. This was like the food of my childhood. Some people think that the combination of sweet and salty is quite frankly disgusting. And my daughter's allergic to peanuts. So I apologize if anybody's triggered by this image. She most definitely would be. She would be very cross with me if she knew that I put this in the talk. People think that these go together to different levels in different ways. And the same is true, tortured metaphor here, but the same is true of design research and behavioral science. Some people think they're best friends, but they can be a polarizing pair. Bear with me a bit. Hopefully by the end of this meetup, you'll all, if you don't already agree they go well together, you all will think so, especially after hearing Annika and Benjamin's brilliant talks earlier. Some people question the relevance of behavioral science to design research. Design research is all about specifics. It is all about looking at the details of journeys and understanding what changes are going to make them more useful and usable for customers or clients. So some people question how relevant is a field aimed at understanding broad patterns, theories, truths about human behavior. What can we do with that? Also, and this, sorry, I don't want to offend anyone, but sometimes behavioral scientists can be kind of annoying. No one in this room, you are all lovely, lovely people, but I've certainly met behavioral scientists who question the value of disciplines like design research, because what are they really telling us about human behavior that we don't already know? Why don't we save our time and not do the research and just read a book? For that reason, sometimes design researchers can be some of the hardest people to get on board with using behavioral science techniques. But what I want to focus on tonight is how can behavioral science make design researchers' jobs easier, better, more effective, and impactful. I'm going to talk through a few key themes tonight, and the first one is that so there's only 4 things I want you to get out of this talk tonight, and they're all right here on this slide, but please stick around because I've got some really interesting stories about them. Behavioral science provides a backdrop of universals so that design research can focus on the specifics. We don't need to prove the universal truths about human behavior. We can look at how they apply to our specific situations. We want to focus on researching the things that change while learning about the things that don't. If we know something is true, again, we don't need to prove it over and over and over again, but we can look at the ways that people's expectations of those things may change over time and with increased knowledge. Another thing we can learn from social psychology is how to critically evaluate our own practice. When can a reckoning or a change in circumstances encourage us to maybe take a closer look at how we're doing things? And finally, we should all avoid temptation into dishonesty, especially doing qualitative research that can sometimes be a bit flexible. We are subject to the same biases as everyone else we've been hearing about here tonight. The fact that we know a little bit more about the field does not mean we are not prone to these things. So how can we learn from social psychology and behavioral science and resist some of that temptation? And I will be talking about 3 crises in social psychology for points 2, 3, and 4, and that's where the gossipy bits come in. But first off, let's talk about where behavioral science might end and design research might begin. As design research, we can be fiercely protective of our boundaries. Some people are real fans of democratizing research, letting everyone we work with get involved in insight collection. I'm not. I'm really not. I will put my hand up and say, I do not believe in democratizing research. I am a research professional, and if you want it done properly, go to a trained researcher. But we can't do everything. We're often focused, like I mentioned, on really concrete challenges. So the kinds of questions we might ask, well, can our users understand any extra fees and charges that they may encounter when purchasing things from us? Do our customers have enough information about our specific product offerings to make decisions about whether or not those products are right for them? Well, behavioral science focuses on the universals behind those processes. So behavioral scientists might ask questions like, how do people perceive extra charges once they've anchored on a base price? Questions like, how do people make decisions when they have limited information? If we are able to look into the answers to those questions, we don't need to research them. If we already take it as given, well, yes, people are going to be irritated if they feel like we're pulling a bait and switch on them and charging them more. We don't have to have endless conversations with our stakeholders about whether we should add on extra fees. We can explain those risks, we can explain those consequences, and then we can do our specific research to understand sort of the boundaries of where our customers or our service users might take issue with what we're doing. We can use behavioral science to bolster our arguments rather than risk undermining them. As Annika pointed out, we can use existing models to provide a framework for our work. We don't need to prove over and over again that, well, if people don't have an opportunity to do something, they won't do it. We can use that to highlight our results and to put them into greater context. And what it can do is it can bolster our findings too. Whenever we're doing a round of qualitative research and a stakeholder says to us, well, yeah, you only talk to 5 people. How can I trust what you learned? Once we finish, putting our microphone on mute and swearing and tearing our hair out, if we're able to point to established academic theories and say, well, we have confidence that people will do X because we know that they do Y under these circumstances, it makes us look more knowledgeable and more convincing. Unfortunately, as you may have guessed from Annika and Benjamin's talks, there's no real shortcut to knowing a lot about behavioral science, but it's a really fascinating topic to read about. Read books, come to talks like this, take classes, get to know your friendly local behavioral scientists. And the more you know about these theories, the more confidence you'll have using them to support your own work. Or you could just go and hire Benjamin. I'm sure he would be happy to do this work with you. I'm going to talk about an example of one of the sort of basic biases that I know that is not all there is to behavioral science, but my background's in judgment and decision making. I love a good cognitive bias, and we're going to talk about the example of choice architecture. So often, if you go to a website to buy something, you will see three choices. You will see the basic, cheap, small, no frills, sometimes free option. You'll see all the bells and whistles, the premium, the huge, like customized support, more than you think you could ever want, premium option. And then you'll see something in the middle. Which option do people want you to choose? Medium, yeah. When you see three choices like this, we know enough about how people make decisions. Everything about this scenario is telling people the middle option is the nice, safe, sensible one. I haven't put in exact amounts of like how many ounces those drinks are. They might be beer, they might be root beer floats. You can choose your favorite fizzy drink of choice. Haven't given options about any information about, ounces or alcohol content or brand or anything like that, because the more specific information you have, the more you can critically evaluate it. But when you're evaluating products you're not very familiar with and you're considering a bunch of criteria that you don't really understand, well, go with the middle one. It's the safest option. These have been chosen to do, the middle option is the option that the company wants you to buy. So they've set up this entire scenario to drive you towards it. It feels safe. You don't have to worry that, ooh, maybe you're not getting enough if you go for the no frills option. Maybe you're a sucker and you're overpaying if you go for the premium option. It taps into the idea that people aren't rationally, like Benjamin pointed out, critically evaluating their choices. They rely on, especially under time pressure, limited motivation, a decision they don't care about all that much. They rely on really superficial features. They choose the middle option. But here we've got an interesting corollary to that, because one thing that started happening is like people know about this now. Lots of you knew about this. More and more, if we see three choices and we've got the opportunity to think about it, we realize, they just want me to choose the middle one. And when people start thinking about effects like this, they start to evaporate. But what if we see three options like this? Which one do they want you to choose? Large. Oh, wow, large is a good deal. It's only 50 pence more than medium. And presumably you get all this extra stuff for it. So we start sort of questioning, ooh, why are they showing me these choices? Ooh, this is too good to be true. I'm a sucker if I don't go for this. And this is called asymmetric dominance, or the decoy effect, because these aren't symmetrical, because there is a large gap between the two bottom options and a small gap between the two good options. It's pushing people to choose the good option. The middle one is the decoy. The middle one is in there specifically so you don't choose it, because who's going to choose something that obviously is worse than the good option when the prices are pretty much identical? If you take that medium option out, you'll often find that more people choose the small option. So putting that in pushes people's choices towards the right. What can we do with this? I'll tell you one thing we really shouldn't do as qualitative researchers is give people three options and ask them which one they would choose. We don't have to do that. Places we work will have, if we work for a company that sells stuff, there will be a pricing team that will figure all of this out. We don't need to know if 6 people think that £6 is a good price for that. What we need to do is look at the data. And where we come in with our qualitative research, with our really detailed, focused inquiry, is when something doesn't happen like we would expect it to. If we think we've set up an asymmetric dominance situation, but everyone's choosing the middle choice, That's when we can come in and try to get inside people's heads, either with quant or with qual methods, and try to figure out what's going on. So we can save our efforts for when they really matter. Tell your team about behavioral science. Tell them how to structure choices if they want people to choose the middle option or they want people to choose the premium option. And then sit back and see what happens. It just saved you 4 weeks of time setting up and running that study. Interestingly, the decoy effect works outside of conscious awareness. So if you know that's what's going on here, it's not going to work on you. If you look at this like, ooh, they're trying to trick me into taking out the premium option, like I mentioned before with the 3 choices, the effect starts to evaporate. And it's another reason why talking to customers might not get you the results you're looking for. It's about what people do rather than what they say. And if people start thinking too much about why they're making a decision like this, kind of like the Hawthorne effect being observed, they will start to make different decisions. This brings me to point number 2, sparked by what I'm calling the first crisis in social psychology. Research the things that change and learn about the things that don't. Some patterns of human behavior endure over time. We are biased, we are irrational, we make decisions based on superficial features rather than rationally evaluating all of our choices, unless we really care about something and we're really invested in it. These are the kinds of things we can take for granted. Human behavior doesn't change that much. If we work for a government organization, people's relationships with government don't really change that much. If we work for a financial services institution, you know what? People's relationships with financial products don't really change that much. I've worked in life insurance. Life insurance has been pretty much the same for 250 years. What does change is people's expectations of what they can get from companies, what kind of service they can expect, what they can do and learn and engage with online. That's the interesting stuff. That's where the meat of it is. So let's take our time looking deeper into the things that do change, but understand the things that don't. I talked about effects evaporating as people learn more about things, and this is a really interesting area, and I've got a bit of social psychology gossip. Sorry, I've gone too far. I'll go back. In 1973, a social psychologist named Kenneth Gergen published a paper called Social Psychology as History. People hate this paper. Social psychologists really, really loathe this, because what he did was question whether research insights had any lasting value. So if you've written a paper, you've done your good work, you've published, you've had an impact, you've maybe been covered in the media, maybe Malcolm Gladwell has written a book and he has mentioned your research in it, all of a sudden your effect stops working, because when people learn about things, they're able to sort of fight against them. An example is conformity research. There's a lot of research done in the US after World War II, the early days of social psychology, into people's tendency to be influenced by authority figures and people's tendency to conform to majorities, even if they didn't really think they should. So how many of you are familiar with Solomon Asch's conformity experiments? A few people. I'll give you a bit of background. So what Solomon Asch did is he got research participants to come into a laboratory setting, sit in a room with a bunch of other participants, and he showed them lines. He showed them like 3 lines at a time and asked them, tell me which line is the longest. But what research participants didn't know is there was only one research participant in the room. Everybody else was in on the trick. And they went around and they systematically gave the wrong answer. And if you look at like photos and video footage of these sessions, the real participant looks befuddled. I'm completely confused, like duped and betrayed. What is going on here? But you know what? They went on and they gave the same answer that everyone else was giving. It wasn't that they thought everyone else was right. It was that they didn't feel comfortable going against the crowd. I don't think this study would work today. And we'll talk about replication. This is sort of a side note to replication. The world is different. Studies like this have been publicized. Anti-conformity is more of a more valued social feature than it probably ever has been at any point in at least our recent history that anyone we know or members of our family are aware of. Would this research work today? Probably not, because people aren't as afraid to stand against the crowd, unless maybe they're teenagers. Maybe then they would still go along, but a bit of a side note. So how can we as design researchers know which insights will endure and which ones are going to quickly become outdated? I mean, there's no hard and fast rule, but think about if the products and services that you're working with, if they're pretty much the same as they were 50 years ago, you've probably already got the insights that you need. Let's focus on how we're delivering them. Look at not at what people need from the service itself, but what they need from its digital incarnations. We need to use our time and energy wisely. The next crisis, and some of you may be familiar with the replication crisis that started in 2011. A group of researchers were prompted, show of hands, familiarity with the replication crisis? So what happened is a paper came out. I'm going to stop naming names here because I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it. I don't want to name and shame, but a very, very well-known, influential academic social psychologist published a paper proving the existence of ESP, or what he called precognition. Did this research for years, ran multiple studies, finally got enough, the 5 or 6 studies required to get a paper published. It was published in the top social psychology journal, proving that research participants could predict at levels above chance or which card what they would see next. A group of it's amazing, right? Do you believe it? Do you really think that this is real? A group of researchers took umbrage at this. Okay, if this is what our field is doing, if somebody can prove using statistical methods and standard experimental design that precognition is a real thing, there's something seriously wrong with the field. Our methods need to change, our ways of running research need to change, the statistics we're using need to change. So they published a fairly damning critique of the field and of techniques like what they call p-hacking. So if you run enough participants, any difference can be statistically significant. If you've got 10,000 participants in each condition, even the tiniest differences you can get statistical significance for. P-hacking is running participants until you get statistical significance. So starting off, you've got 20 participants in each cell. Nah, there's a difference, but it's not significant. So you run 5 more in each cell. Still not there. And you keep doing that until magically, ooh, it's statistically significant. Great, I'm going to take this paper and I'm going to publish it. Techniques like the file drawer problem, where stuff that doesn't work just gets shelved. So if you're looking for a statistical significance level of 5% and you run 20 studies, even if they're all rubbish and none of them actually have any effect, chances are 1 out of those 20, 5% will have a significant effect. If you have a team of researchers running 100 studies, you're going to be able to publish a paper. So they critiqued techniques like this, and they started a campaign to replicate other researchers' findings. Because there was novel effects are what gets attention in social psychology, or did before 2011, like learning new things, demonstrating ideas that resonate, but in new and interesting ways, was the way that the field operated. Why would you repeat somebody else's research? It feels like copying, and nobody's going to publish it. So research would not be replicated. So once they started replicating projects, they realized that many of them did not hold. So, I mean, this even got media attention. So it's, yeah, it was covered a lot. A lot of really famous studies in the field were proven not to be true, and it just didn't hold up to scrutiny. And this has been found in the hard sciences too. Research is done shoddily. You get shoddy results. And you can't really rely on what you thought you knew. I mean, this headline, everything is crumbling. Like, if the foundations of a field disappear, what do? What can you rely on? So these approaches were exposed, and a lot of really august figures were sort of taken down at the knees. Roy Baumeister, eminent social psychologist who did a lot of work in a theory called ego depletion. And this is the idea that your self-control is like a muscle. If you resist things for long enough, eventually your ability to resist things will weaken and you will be more prone to temptation. So like chocolate buttons, somebody gives you chocolate buttons, nah, no thanks, I don't want any. But here, have some chocolate. Eventually, you're gonna waver, you're gonna crack, and you're gonna eat 6 bags of chocolate buttons. These studies failed to replicate. And Roy Baumeister himself, this quote is, if you go back to the early days of social psychology, there was quite a bit of engineering the procedures just right to get people to perceive and experience things in a certain way. A lot of attention was put into crafting the perfect experimental situation, so that in this context-free environment, if you varied one single thing, you'd get the effect you wanted. And this right here is why a lot of design researchers don't really trust social psychology, because we're all about the context. Context of use is one of the foundations of what we do. We need to understand what people are doing in the environments that they're doing it in. I put that smiley face up to prime you all to feel positively about this talk, but I shouldn't have bothered because priming is another thing that doesn't really exist. It turns out that if you show people word puzzles that include stereotypes about elderly people, they don't actually then walk more slowly down a hall. It was an ephemeral effect that has not replicated either. Standards changed, the field changed with it. Methods did change in social psychology. And it got more rigorous, but in some ways it also got a little bit more boring. So in 2009, only 6% of social psychology papers included research studies conducted online. This feels a bit late to come around to the fact that the online world is the real world. What's the stat? 25% of teenagers look at their phones while walking, don't walk without looking at their phone at the same time. You can't really say that online life is not real life. But social psychology did come around. In 2018, 50% of published papers included studies conducted online. Because you needed more rigorous methods, you needed more people. It's really hard to run hundreds of people in a lab study. The need for simplicity of methods also meant that social psychology started relying more heavily on self-report measures. So that included total reliance on self-report measures, which was never considered the gold standard. That increased in that same period of time. That went from 46% of published papers to 68%. So in 2018, more than 2/3 of papers published in social psychology journals did not have any behavioral effects. The only effects were things that people said they thought, felt, or did. And if you're a design researcher who knows that we don't really listen to what people say in the lab. It's interesting, but we're so much more interested in what they do, what they struggle with, how the micro expressions that indicate that they find something confusing, even as they say, oh, yeah, I thought this was fine. Or, I have trouble with this, but, my granddaughter would be absolutely fine with this, so it's completely fine. We know that the stories that they're telling are not necessarily what we and our teams need to know. But in some ways, the field of social psychology is stronger. When you do get a finding, you can trust it more. The methods are being published, the data sets are being shared, replication is happening. And doing research online gets rid of the overfocus on university undergraduates as research participants, because university undergraduates are weird. It's an acronym. So yeah, they are weird, as in a bit strange, but they are also Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. That those 5 characteristics explain the overwhelming majority of research participants recruited in undergraduate laboratories. So online research theoretically opens up the world. What can we learn from this as design researchers? How can we adapt our practice? Do our current methods of recruiting research participants still hold? Do we have the same problem if we're over-relying on people found by marketing research agencies and people who are motivated to click on and survey intercepts and give us feedback? What are we missing by not casting our net more widely? Are our methods due for a change? These are provocative questions, so if you disagree, I'd be really happy to talk about this sort of thing down at the pub. Usability testing. Usability testing hasn't really changed, has it? I mean, it was one thing when digital, like the internet was new, and we really wanted to understand how people were using it. But don't we know by now? Every website looks the same. At what point are we able to say, look, we know what good design looks like, we know what good experiences look like, can we focus our efforts on something else rather than just validating that our website that looks like all our other websites is working for people? It's an open question. Really interested to hear thoughts later. But I'm coming to the very fourth one, and I know I'll make this very quick. I'll be done in just a couple of minutes. Avoid temptation into dishonesty. As where things get a little bit personal, because as a social psychologist, I studied unethical behavior. Dishonesty was my stock in trade. I looked at ways that small changes to situations could inspire university undergraduates to lie, cheat, and steal, to misrepresent their performance on quasi-academic tasks in order to earn more money from the experimenter. Or actually, in my specific research, to avoid losing money from an experimenter. Because one thing I found was that loss aversion played a really big role. If people felt like poor performance would cause them to lose money, they were more likely to misrepresent that performance in order to keep it. Some of the other ideas I was exploring were, well, is it about people's expectations of their performance? Are they in fact cheating to represent something that they believe is true about themselves? I love doing this research. It was so much fun. This is why I love design research, because I get to design new experimental situations all the time. It's brilliant. I love this, but I decided to leave the field. I decided I was too impatient. I had to make like Elsa and let it go. This is just a bit of fun because I was playing with Copilot and I asked it to put in a slide that followed the format of the other slides in the deck that included a full body image of Elsa from the cartoon Frozen. Our jobs are still safe for a while yet. Hope that's reassuring. But last summer, I started seeing headlines like these. I was really used to the ones about the replication crisis, but I started seeing headlines like, they studied dishonesty, was their work a lie? It turned out that some of the luminaries in the field, the ones who when I left the field, I thought, it's okay because there are really good, talented people, absolute publishing powerhouses, huge successes, they'll carry on. They will uncover really important things about dishonesty and unethical behavior. And you know what? I was wrong. They cheated, they lied, they falsified data. I'm not going to name names here, but if you Google Harvard social psychologist $25 million lawsuit, and you'll find who I'm talking about. You know the researchers I mentioned who sort of spurred the whole replication crisis, they were the ones who discovered that her data didn't match up. She is suing them for defamation for $25 million. It's fun to read. I've fallen down multiple rabbit holes reading about this. My research is pretty boring, thank God. I thought it was a great headline, because if you fly under the radar, you don't get this sort of attention. And that author, I love this quote, here's the reality for academics. Strong research is very seldom sexy and will only infrequently get turned into a primetime drama starring Jesse L. Martin. That's another clue for one of the researchers who was accused of this type of behavior. As design researchers, we also face pressure to find insights that support a particular course of action. Our public careers may not depend on our insights, our public faces may not depend on our insights, but our careers might, especially if we're working in more precarious positions, if we're contracting or consulting or freelancing. We often feel the pressure to tell our benefactors what they want to hear. What do we do when we get subtle or not so subtle messages that if we don't play along, our jobs might be on the line? How do we evaluate the need to protect customers and provide them with good experiences with the need to protect ourselves so that we can continue doing the work that we love, the work that we get paid to do? How strongly do we advocate for users in the face of relentless pressure to effectively advocate for our stakeholders? How do we maintain our integrity in a context where literally everything we do is open to interpretation? How do we pick our battles? I'm going to suggest, probably not surprising at this point in the talk, behavioral science can help us with that. The strength of that field in our pocket, we can present our findings more confidently. They are supported by sometimes decades of evidence, and we don't have to worry about fighting those battles alone. Of course, we want to make sure that we're checking to make sure that those results haven't been debunked. But we can rest on the shoulders of others, really, and just keep fighting the good fight. I hope I've given you all a few things to think about, entertained you with some gossip and some hopefully interesting stories, and taught you some new perspectives on behavioral science. It is not a perfect field, and I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. Every field has its imperfections, but we can learn from its strengths, but also from its shortcomings, and especially from its capacity to continually reinvent itself. Like Annika said, it is a lot more than nudges. And I was going to turn things over to Benjamin, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say thank you all for listening and hope you enjoy the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And a lovely big round of applause. Thank you. We can almost get rid of that.